J. Harris for the state. May I proceed? Please introduce yourself to the members of the jury and spell your last name for the record.
Hi, my name is Reese Warren. Warren is spelled W-A-R-R-E-N.
Mr. Warren, what do you do for a living?
Well, currently I'm a professor and also the chair of the Department of Linguistics at Midland State University. I also consult closely with the Midland State Police Academy in lecturing both their cadets and law enforcement officers on the proper techniques in gathering testimony during undercover operations.
Mr. Warren, you just mentioned linguistics. What is that?
Linguistics is the study of language and conversations.
So what are some of your responsibilities as a linguist?
Well, I consult closely with forensic psychologists in order to determine how what you say during the course of a conversation affects the listeners and the other people in that conversation, both verbally and non-verbally, in the way that you structure your body language and the inflections and tones of your voice.
So what education do you have to work in the field of linguistics?
Well, I received my PhD in linguistics from Georgetown University in the District of Columbia, and before that, I received my bachelor's in linguistics from the University of North Carolina, and as such, I consider myself a devout fan of the Tar Heels.
What education do you have in the field of linguistics, Dr. Warren?
Well, I've also published 37 peer-reviewed articles that have appeared in both linguistics and psychology journals. On top of that, I have my textbook, How to Speak to Alleged Criminals, is actually standard text in many different police academies, including Midland State Police Academy.
Now, Mr. Warren, how exactly does linguistics relate to undercover work?
Well, when you're preparing a conversation with a suspect in order to gather evidence and testimony, you have to be careful about what you say to the suspect so that you're not inducing criminal activity in someone that would otherwise be unwilling to commit that activity in the first place.
So, Dr. Warren, how exactly are you involved in today's case?
Well, originally I was retained by the defense for a flat rate of $10,000 in order to provide an analysis on whether or not the actions of the Midland State Police Department rose to the level of entrapment during their investigation of the Midlands Gambling Commission. After I provided my conclusions that the police department acted reasonably, I was told that I would no longer be needed to testify and my services were no longer required. And at that point, I was approached by the state and asked to testify on behalf of the prosecution, which is why I'm here today.
Dr. Warren, to complete your assessment, were you supplied with sufficient facts and data?
Yes. For my analysis, I was provided with a recording of a March 31st conversation between undercover officer Mickey Keenan, casino owner Avery Bancroft, and Avery Bancroft's executive assistant Corey Hyde. I was also provided with a March 30th email exchange between Officer Keenan and Corey Hyde, who at that point was acting as an informant for Officer Keenan. And I was also provided with the affidavits of both Officer Keenan and Corey Hyde.
What principles and methods did you use to complete your assessment?
Well, for my analyses, I focused on how they structured their conversation with Avery Bancroft on March 31st in order to ensure that the conversation aligned with the best practices that are agreed upon by linguists in order to structure your conversation with the suspect.
Dr. Warren, you just mentioned best practices. Please explain to the members of the jury what best practices you used to complete your assessment.
Yes, the two that are pertaining to that conversation on March 30th and the email exchange, there are certain steps that you must take when you're structuring your conversation. And the first is that you should ask open-ended questions so that the target can freely incriminate themselves. After these questions are asked, you can begin to start dropping subtle hints of criminal activity without stating what that activity is, in hopes that the suspect latches onto these and further implicates themselves in criminal activity.
So, Dr. Warren, did you use these best practices methods and apply them to the facts and data that you were supplied with?
Absolutely. These are the same methods that I teach to both my students at the university and the cadets and officers at the police academy. Not only do I take pride in my work, but it'd be a little hypocritical of me if I didn't apply those during my work.
Dr. Warren, how did you begin your analysis?
Well, I began with a transcript analysis in which I analyzed the conversation on March 31st and examined what Officer Keenan and Corey Hyde said and determined that they did indeed align with the best practices agreed upon by linguists by starting off asking classic open-ended questions and then moving on to provide subtle hints of the criminal activity.
Is this all that your analysis determined?
Actually, no. I also examined both the tape and the email exchange for signs of conversational strategies that have been shown through research to induce criminal activity in otherwise unwilling suspects. And for my analysis, I examined the tape and the email exchange for the 10 most commonly used and the 10 most commonly used strategies, and determined that only 4 of them were used, and they were used in a very limited scope.
You mentioned 10 conversational strategies. Would you mind going over these 10 for the members of the jury?
Yeah, absolutely. So the 10 strategies include speaking on behalf of the suspect, outright lying to the suspect, controlling the flow of the conversation, manipulating the tape, using ambiguous language, inaccurately restating the target's answers, inaccurately using ambiguous answers from the suspect as a yes, coaching of informants, and ignoring unwilling conduct from the suspect.
So what did you find in regards to these conversational strategies?
Well, the 4 strategies that I did find use of were manipulating the tape, coaching of informants, interrupting the suspect, and speaking on behalf of the suspect.
How were these 4 used?
Well, first I'd like to start off with the coaching of informants. The March 30th email exchange between Officer Keenan and Corey Hyde, who again was acting as Officer Keenan's informant at that point. During this email exchange, Officer Keenan provides Corey Hyde with certain topics to bring up, such as sweetening the pot and...
Objection, Your Honor. Facts not evidence. May I be heard? Of course. Your Honor, this specific email exchange to which Dr. Warren is referring to has not been entered into evidence yet, and for that reason, specific statements from that email exchange cannot be referred to in court today.
Your Honor, this witness used that email exchange to come to his conclusion today, and according to Millen's case law, Richards versus Mississippi Barbecue, any testimony or documents that he used to come to his conclusion is admissible in today's trial.
Your Honor, may I be heard?
It's really not necessary. The court would like to see, so your objection is sustained.
Yes, Your Honor.
Would you recognize that email if I showed it to you today?
Yes.
Permission to approach the opposing counsel with this amendment. Permission to approach the witness with the same. What did I just hand you?
This is a copy of the email exchange between Officer Mickey Keenan and Corey Hyde that I examined during my analysis.
Does it appear to be a fair and accurate copy?
Yes, it does.
Your Honor, at this time, the state moves to admit plaintiffs to its evidence.
Any objection?
Prosecution says.
Yes, Your Honor. We would like to make one objection, which is to lack of foundation. We understand that this document is pertinent to today's case, but we don't know how. Opposing counsel has yet to lay foundation as to how precisely Dr. Warren used this email and why it's pertinent to his conclusions in today's case.
Your Honor, this witness has already stated that he reviewed conversational strategies that might induce targets to further incriminate themselves, and that email goes exactly to that conversational strategy that he was just speaking of.
Your Honor, we are aware of this fact ourselves. However, we have yet to hear Dr. Warren himself state for the court that he specifically used this email in order to come to his conclusions as to whether or not coaching was a concern in today's case. And for that reason, there is a lack of foundation.
Your Honor, I asked this witness what did he find in regards to the conversational strategies? He listed off before, and one of them was coaching, and he said that from that email, that's where he got coaching from, Your Honor. He has laid the foundation that this is where he got that information from, Your Honor.
Objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Is this document admitted?
Yes, it is.
And you were saying that you got the conversational strategies from that email. Please continue.
Yeah, so in regards to the coaching of an informant, during this email exchange, Officer Keenan does supply Corey Hyde with certain topics of the conversation to bring up during the March 31st conversation. These being that he needs to, that he should probably bring up something about sweetening the pot and making people happy. Now, yes, this is textbook coaching and is some concern. However, these topics fall in line with structuring the conversation in line with the best practices as agreed on by linguists, by providing subtle hints of the criminal activity.
Now, Mr. Warren, I want to talk about Officer Keenan's investigation. What exactly did Officer Keenan do right?
Well, I've actually prepared a demonstrative in order to show the jury what Officer Keenan did right during his investigation.
Your Honor, at this time, let the witness step down and make use of demonstrative evidence.
No objection, Your Honor. We just ask that we reposition ourselves so that we may properly see it.
Great.
Dr. Warren, what are we looking at here?
So you were looking at a list of everything that I've compiled that Officer Keenan did right during his investigation of the Midlands Gambling Commission.
And what about the first one, open-ended questions?
Yes, during the March 31st conversation, Officer Keenan and Corey Hyde both asked very open-ended questions that, such as, what are you thinking? Or what sort of amenities are you thinking of? These allow the target to implicate themselves freely.
The second, drop hints.
Yeah, so over the course of the conversation, Officer Keenan and Corey Hyde both dropped multiple subtle hints of criminal activity without mentioning expressly what that was. These hints included topics such as sweetening the pot and making people happy, greasing the wheels, none of which expressly indicate exactly what they're talking about, but the suspect can latch onto these and further implicate themselves.
Let's go on to the third point, never mention the bride. Explain that.
Yeah, so Officer Keenan and his informant, Corey Hyde, never once expressly mentioned a bribe during the course of their conversation.
And the fourth, repeated the suspect's own words.
Yes, upon my review of the affidavits, there was one point where Officer Keenan brings up money. However, he is only referring to the suspect's own previous words, and it is a direct quote from the suspect himself. So this is not as much of a concern.
And what about the last?
Yes, as I said, there were 10 conversational strategies that I examined over the course of my analysis. And while in other cases, which I've been compelled to testify in, these strategies were used far more egregiously than they were in today's case. So all the conversational strategies that they used were used in a very limited scope.
Thank you. You may retake your seat. Dr. Warren, were you able to come to a conclusion based upon a reasonable degree of professional certainty?
Yes, absolutely, I was.
What is that conclusion?
Well, I was able to conclude that Officer Keenan and Corey Hyde did indeed structure their conversation properly on March 31st, and they avoided the use of most conversational strategies shown to induce criminal activity in someone who would be otherwise unwilling to conduct that. So in my conclusions, I did determine that the police department did act within reason in terms of linguistics.
Thank you. At this time, I have no further questions. Thank you.
Cross